Hi, I'm Sharon Cowan, and I'm here with Matt Bader and Frank Connery. We're members of Bedford Presbyterian Church, that church that you see in the town center, close to the library and the town hall. We're also members of the Bedford Presbyterian Church work recovery team that went to Puerto Rico in April as a team of 28 volunteers, and we're here to share our experiences. This is the first of a series of programs that Bedford Presbyterian Church will be doing on BCTV to talk about our experiences both in Puerto Rico and other locations, as well as give you some tips on how to plan a trip like this if you're in an organization that would like to do that. I want to put in a little context about Puerto Rico just shortly, just a short context so that you understand and remember some things that are vital to this, this discussion. One is that Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. It's not a state, but it is part of the United States, and as such, Puerto Rican citizens are citizens of the United States. Also, as you will remember, September 20th, 2017, the island of Puerto Rico was slammed by Hurricane Maria. It was a Category 5 storm. Hurricanes are categorized by the wind speed they pack, and Category 5 is the absolute highest a hurricane can be assigned. And Hurricane Maria sat over the island of Puerto Rico for 36 hours and devastated it with wind and water damage. So the island deeply suffered from this hurricane, and unfortunately it followed a hurricane that had happened 2 weeks before that, Hurricane Irma, that ultimately hit Florida. It didn't do as much damage to the island of Puerto Rico, but it did do some damage. And earlier that 2017 season, Hurricane Harvey hit the city of Houston, also devastating disaster to that city. So resources in the fall of 2017 for hurricane damage were really spread out and deployed. And so Puerto Rico, for a variety of reasons, not only suffered damage, but didn't get the kind of support that would have been beneficial immediately after the disaster. Even though there were early responders on the ground in Puerto Rico from outside the island, the first week after the hurricane, the recovery and disaster response was really slow. Frank and Matt were here with me to talk about their experiences as actually doing reconstruction on our work team to Puerto Rico. And I was a member of the team to kind of look around and see what our church could do to support Puerto Rico on an ongoing basis. Frank, you want to give a history of how Bedford Presbyterian Church got involved in the hurricane recovery work that we've been doing for 13 years, 14 years now?
Certainly, Sharon. So it started in 2006, following the Katrina in 2005. We had always talked about doing some type of mission-oriented work within the congregation. We saw this complete devastation to New Orleans, so we formed a team, a guidance team who did some research, networked out to Presbyterian Disaster Association, and made our first trip in 2006 to New Orleans. It was a life-changing event for many of us. We had a team of intergenerational, so we had kids that were about 16 all the way to some folks who were chronologically 80-ish. We'll leave it at that. Again, life-changing. The devastation to the area was unbelievable. Stays with me to this day. 14 years later, or 13 years later, 14 trips total. One of the things I remember is just the piles of debris on every corner, boats that were on land on their side, 8 to 10 miles away from bodies of water. But what really stays with me is the people. We were able to, myself anyway, spiritually grew just seeing the faith that they had and their desire, more so than just to have another roof over their head, was to tell their story, to express their experiences. It was touching. I mean, I still get choked up when I think about it. So we gave a 5-year commitment to New Orleans, so we went down there for another 4 years after our first trip in 2006. Then we felt that we needed to kind of mix it up a little bit. Every mission needs to stay fresh, so we ended up going to trying to get down to West Virginia, which has a systemic poverty. So we've actually kind of dealt with disaster relief and systemic poverty, and some of it is commingled, but for New Orleans, it was strictly the disaster recovery. West Virginia was going to be for systemic poverty. Unfortunately, we were unable to get into West Virginia that year that we wanted to, so we went up to Maine, which has, again, just systemic poverty, one state over from where we live. So we did a year there, and then we went down into West Virginia for 3 years. Then we did Sandy. We did a couple, actually we call it 603. Often we'll call our mission trips the area code. So 603, we actually stayed local for a couple years and worked on some houses in the greater Manchester area. Last year we ended up going down to Houston, and then when we started talking about what is our next step, what's our next venue to go to, it was just brought up in conversation about how the lack, to your point, the lack of response, both government-wise and just recovery-wise with Puerto Rico. So we made a decision. Again, we did all of our research, our homework, made sure that it was a safe area to go to, made sure that we had team members down there that would vet the houses that we would be working on. And that kind of brings us to Puerto Rico.
So I remember hearing when we were in Katrina, working on Katrina damage, that it was largely charitable organizations like Habitat for Humanity and churches who were largely spearheading the recovery work in a lot of those areas. And I think that's also true in Puerto Rico, that the churches, the government wasn't there when needed as much as one might have expected. And so there were questions, where are the churches? And the churches have really stepped up, and in local churches, but also national churches have sent teams down as well.
Sharon, you're 100% correct. The faith-based organizations are really the backbone of disaster recovery and systemic poverty assistance.
So Matt, you're going to show some pictures and just talk briefly about what kinds of things, just to kind of frame this a little bit in terms of what happened.
So we have a picture here of Puerto Rico, and in the very center area, circled, is Comerío, which is a town that we worked in primarily. We stayed west of San Juan and drove each day down to Comerío, and it was about an hour plus a couple minutes, depending on which road you chose. And so this is the entrance to the town. You can see that curved green sign announces you entering the town, and the water behind it is the water that's coming over the bridge into that town, and you can see obviously the devastation happening behind it. And this is that sign today. Shows you some of the areas and where some of the damage was. And here, this is a very typical scene of what's still there now. When we got down there, things are just in a state of disrepair. So
Frank, you talked about why we went to Puerto Rico, that there was a real need down there. When we do these trips, what's the goal of the trip? What are we doing when we go down there?
So one of our main ideas and rules that we try to stick to is we do what they ask us to do. So it can be construction, it can be sweeping, it can be mucking out, and we go down there being foreigners to a certain extent, and that's foreigners to Houston, foreigners to New Orleans, foreigners to Puerto Rico. Right. I mean, culturally, we're different. We're New Englanders. So one of the things we always have to kind of rein in is we're not going down there to tell them how we're going to help you. We go down there to ask, how can we help you? What do you need? I remember one of our first trips. I worked for a wonderful woman. She was the matriarch of the neighborhood, and she had been living in a FEMA trailer for 8 months. And all she really wanted, and we were probably the 5th or 16th, was she wanted some holes patched so snakes couldn't get into her house. And teams had been working there, and they did wonderful work there, but she wanted those holes patched to stop the snakes coming in. So that's what we really needed to listen to. We needed to listen to what do they want, what's important to them, not really what's important to us or what we think this is the best thing for you.
Right. We go down with there with ideas of grandeur, of how much we're going to help them, but when we come back, sometimes it's we've learned so much and/or just changed based on the people that we meet and the work that we do.
So we do a lot of work around construction and rebuilding, but rebuilding people's lives, not just
The physical structure.
Does physical structure. This time we also went down with kind of the goal of looking for opportunities to foster an ongoing relationship with both the churches and the people who live there, and we're hoping to not just do reconstruction and rebuilding in the future, although I think there's an interest in doing that again, but also to what can we do from either remotely, or what other work could we do down there besides rebuilding, because there are a lot of needs in Puerto Rico that we found when we were down there.
So our area was kind of unique. We actually stayed up by the coast, as Matt had mentioned, then we drove into the mountains and kind of a rainforest environment. And the roads were about a lane and a half wide with traffic going both ways, with sheer cliffs to your left and going down, and sheer cliffs to your right going up when you're heading in, and vice versa on the way out. And it just amazes me how they could actually get recovery up there. Power lines were down. The infrastructure was in terrible shape to begin with, and infrastructure as far as roads. So these people were isolated for months and months. And that last picture that Matt showed just shows you some of the destruction there. And again, we're talking a very mountainous area. That was one of our challenges.
But the electric grid was down for almost a year in some places, so there was a lack of electricity and cell phone coverage for a lot of the island too.
Right. And they told us about that when we were doing some of our pre-planning, that the power does tend to go out occasionally. And we'd asked right up before we left about the cell phone coverage, and they said that it was pretty much across the island still, or back in service.
So when we decide to go on a trip, this year we decided to go to Puerto Rico. How long does it take, do you think, to plan for a trip like this? So you all are very involved early on in planning for the next trip. So how long before the trip takes place do you start planning?
6 to 8 months.
Yeah, not quite a year, but there's that euphoria while you're there, and when you come back from the trip, and then oh yeah, we got to start thinking about it again. So.
Well, we do a lot of debriefing too, right? We just spend a lot of time talking about what didn't go well, what we should do differently.
And even nightly, we try to do that within our teams, because it's a traumatic experience, particularly for people that have. This is the first time they're experiencing that, seeing the devastation and seeing the poverty and the sadness. Yet there's always there's a shining star in it too. Even within that sadness of, just as I mentioned, just the strength and the faith of so many of the people. That's one of the things I get out of the trip is I take a little bit of that home.
There was a lot of feeling when people I talked to realized that in some ways the storm was a blessing, because they got they got into the community, they met their neighbors, they met new people, and they realized that it's important that they all work together. So they're relying on outside teams to come in, but they're also stepping up and doing a lot of grassroots projects and rebuilding and rethinking about how they all live together and work together, and their communities are very important. So that was really interesting to me as well.
I've heard that multiple times also.
Yeah, and before we got there, we heard how proud they are of their island and wanting to help each other out, and and how well they came together to assist.
Right. So we're going to talk more about this in an upcoming program with BCTV. But what kinds of resources do you use to get ready to plan, or when you're planning for the next trip?
George. Yep. George Reese is our chief planner, but he networks through PDA. He networks
Presbyterian
with
Disaster Assistance. Yeah.
Correct. He'll network out with just contacts he's made. We've worked for a couple different organizations, but PDA is our primary resource for both finding facilities, making sure that we're appropriate. Our skill set is the correct skill set for what they're hoping, the work that we'll perform. Right. So I'd say that's probably the major one. And I'll give you some credit too, Sharon. I mean, you found many different websites that were basic informative websites, so we could understand culturally, the differences, some of the background, put some color on the whole story. So you use social media at times also?
Yeah.
So a lot of blind phone calling as well. I know George did a lot of, the reference down in Puerto Rico said, well, this group or this church came down. George would ask for a phone number to call them and see, just to get a feel for what their experience was while they were down there. What happened while they were there, what went well, what didn't go well.
Right.
what they were, what they would do differently, those kind of things.
So you alluded to this when you were showing pictures, Matt, but I think it's important to really point out the fact that we were a team of volunteers. There were 28 of us, all different ages. So we had people taking a break from school.
Yeah.
We had older adults. We had people who are highly skilled with construction and rebuilding skills, and there were people who had virtually no skills. So there was a real effort to match people to the projects, but also everybody felt like they made a contribution, and we had fun too. It was a
Yes, we did.
good team building.
My typical answer when somebody says, I don't have any skills, is everybody has skills. Everybody can pound a nail, can push a broom, can talk to the homeowner, which again, I keep circling back to that. Such an important piece is to actually network and connect with the person we're helping or the family that we're helping.
A lot of the things we're doing sometimes is just listening to stories, because people, haven't been able to share in some cases what they went through and how they feel, and there's a lot of trauma attached to going through a storm like this.
Like Frank had mentioned, you make a connection when we didn't have as pleasant an experience when we went down for Sandy in New York, because when we went to their house, they would already left for work. We left to go back, and they came home from work. So it was a little different in Puerto Rico for us, for our team, and I think everybody.
All the teams, I think.
All the teams.
Homeowners.
The homeowners were there interacting, and you really do hear their story, and you see it in their eyes. You see their excitement and happiness, and when you leave. And we had a gentleman, Rubin. We were joking that Rubin got his groove back because at the end of the first day, he was still a little hesitant, and end of the second day, he had his salsa music on, and he was dancing in the living room. So it was kind of neat.
You can see him transform.
Yeah, very much so. Yep.
Do you want to share some other pictures?
Sure. So this is the house that I worked on, and you can see the picture has a blue tint in it because, well, there's blue tarp all over this, and some of the strapping and whatnot just to keep it dry. And here's the same roof structure without the tarp, and so you can see we're putting in a new center beam in here. There's some electrical work that we did not get to, but needs to get done still.
So Matt, I'm just going to point out,
Sure.
Those two women, before they went into this program, this job, said that they had no construction skills.
None.
And look at them, on ladders, pounding nails,
Right. They're
reframing a roof.
handing plywood up, sheets of plywood up, and the rafters that we had made to get up there. Yep. And this one here is a very special picture to me because that's one of my daughters that came down. Both of my daughters came down. Two of my daughters came down on this trip. Here she is, using the handsaw. No,
Cordless
impact
drill?
driver. Yeah, putting together some framing members. And this is another job, different site, same issue. They were working on a cement roof, trying to scrape off the old and put down some new paint and sealant on that area. Shall I keep going?
Sure.
So to Matt's point, that was a pretty common job. We had a couple jobs that we needed to redo the roof, and it's a latex, so we had to scrape it all up. But to the point of the roof, we have a friend who's been on many of the mission trips also, who is unfortunately relocated, so he wasn't with us this past trip. But he's a pilot for Southwest Airlines, and he flies into San Juan, and he still tells a story that it's a sea of blue tarps as he's flying into San Juan. So there's a lot of work left to be done there.
Yeah, so this picture here is another site where, actually I think it was the same site with the second roof picture that we saw, where the water leaks through, and now all the ceiling and the inside, the paint and whatnot, peels, and you can see what the water has done to that ceiling fan. Just bent the fan blade right down. Another site where we were installing some doors, clearing debris. There's a lot of debris still down there.
That's George, our planner.
Yes, it is. Here's a crew cleaning out some trash that ended up behind the building. And so this is a really cool picture. This is the homeowners interacting we're being interviewed for another project that we've got going, and what she's holding in her hand is a prayer shawl, and our group always comes down with 4 or 5 or 6 different prayer shawls that members from our community, members from our church knit, and we bring down a prayer shawl and a Bible generally, and give those to the homeowners on our way out.
So, Matt, I'd like to share my story of the prayer shawl with Carmine, the gentleman that I worked on his house. So there was a language barrier to a certain extent. He had some broken English, and we had a member of the team who had some broken Spanish. So we were able to communicate to us at a certain level. But we also had folks from the Lutheran Church, who is the organization we stayed with and put us up, who were native Puerto Ricans, so they were obviously fluent. And they weren't there when we presented them with the prayer shawl. And it's 85 degrees, and this is a knitted shawl, and he put it around his shoulders, but I don't think he really understood what it was and why we were giving it to him. And then later, when our translator came by, we explained to him that it's a prayer shawl that, as they're knitting every stitch, they're saying a prayer for the person who's going to eventually own it. And it was amazing. His face just dropped. He truly grabbed it and hugged it, and it was heartwarming. It was really neat when he understood what it was.
So I want to ask you guys a personal question. So you guys both have gone on most of these trips, if not all of them. And I'm just wondering, you both have challenging day jobs, you both have families, you both have other interests, you both do other work for the church. Why do you keep going on these trips? What do you get out of these trips?
Me first?
Go ahead, Matt.
Sure. It's just very, very rewarding. Yeah, sometimes you're not staying in the best of places, where we stayed in a
Storage trailer.
storage trailer as our place of where we would sleep. Okay, you're in a storage trailer now with 12 or 15 other men that
Snore.
might snore. So sometimes you deal with those things, but those hardships, air quotes, they're not hard. It's a week of your life, and you're giving back to the people that need it, and it's just very it's rewarding. I don't know a better way to say it.
Okay.
It just feels good to give back.
Do you have anything to add? Phil?
So my experience has changed over the years of doing this. So in 2006, when your husband Larry Cowan asked me to go on our first trip, I had no clue of why I should be doing it. Other than I love to pound nails, I like building, I like construction, and I saw it as an opportunity to go down there and swing a hammer and build something. That changed almost immediately when I understood the devastation down there. So it went from just a guy off the street that wants to pound nails to somebody that I wanted to help people. And it sounds like a cliche, but you get so much more out of it than you're giving. I mean, you take so much more home than you're leaving there. And I remember that first year, we would wear our shirts identifying ourselves as Bedford Presbyterian Church, and we'd go to get some coffee out of the store, the CVS, and people would always come up to you and complete strangers and thank us. And it was very uncomfortable at first for me anyway to take that thanks, because I was getting so much out of it. I felt a little selfish, guilty about it, until probably almost 3/4 of the way through the week, I finally realized I just had to say thank you. You're welcome. I mean, when they were saying thank you, all a simple "you're welcome" was all they were looking for.
Right.
And then again, to try to tell their story.
And I would add to that one of the reasons I go is just it's a great way to meet and get to know fellow church members in a better way. It's a great, team of people, a great group of people. We get to know each other really well. And
Dormitory sleeping, I mean, it's hard not to.
It's true. It's true. So I would add that that's another reason that it's good to go. And it's all ages, like we said, in the church.
So,
and it's a new experience for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I've been blessed. You mentioned your 2 daughters on this trip. My eldest son came down on the Puerto Rican trip, his 5th trip. I've been lucky enough to have both my sons together, and then also have just my younger son. So I try to encourage them on these. And again, that's kind of a selfish, I get to spend the week with them. So that's another one of the reasons I enjoy going.
So I want to focus back on Puerto Rico again. So every place we've been has its unique challenges, and Puerto Rico was no exception. So what did you see as the challenges, particular challenges to working in Puerto Rico?
Material,
In what way?
tools.
Tools.
Right. Right. We normally travel with our tools, and we've got a work trailer that we drag, but
Can't drive it.
Can't quite drag it to Puerto Rico. So, and we've had organizations that tell us, yeah, we have all the tools you need. Don't worry. And then we get there, and it's not quite what we need. So, so there's that difficulty.
Sometimes the inexperience of the organization that we're working with,
Right.
and I mean that both on a construction level and on just a logistics level. And these are wonderful people who are doing
well-meaning,
wonderful things.
Yep.
So it's not a slight at all. It's just, they didn't come from necessarily a construction background or a hospitality background. And they're doing it week after week after week. We're down there for a week.
Right.
There's people before us, and there's going to be people after us.
And they themselves are survivors, right?
And
so
they're-
the
yep,
people that we were counting on in Puerto Rico, local people, had themselves survived the hurricane.
Right.
Right. So, and there were also unique construction challenges, right? There were
A lot of concrete,
concrete,
block.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Cement roofs. That was it. That was something new for us.
Okay. And I also remember that the population of Puerto Rico is older. It's aging population. A lot of people have left the island. A lot of people, even more people left after the hurricane
Yeah.
because there were no jobs for months, right?
Right.
People were out of work,
Right.
couldn't.
Whole families
Whole
relocated
families were
to the States.
right.
And I think during one of our prep meetings, Sharon, you had some figures about how the population is decreased. And it was some phenomenal number that there are actually, I think, more Puerto Ricans in the greater New York area now than there are on the island, or something along that effect. Maybe it was the whole continent of the United States. But
Right.
that's crazy.
Yeah. So, so talk about accomplishments. What did we actually get done when we were there? What did you do?
Perfect segue. Let me show you another
Oh,
picture.
okay.
So this was the roof I worked on, and so you can see all new rafters are in there, plywood on there. But I want you to look around, not at the work site here. Blue tarp still on the right. The house just past that, no roof. The roof straight across is, you can't see it really from this picture, but a lot of material is missing. The house in the back top left is still under construction and opens. There's an opening at the end of the building, still hasn't been closed. So this is almost the full completion of the roof, but we put metal panels on and sealed up the roof when we were done.
Some of our other jobs, we installed some doors and some windows at one site. Earlier, we showed a picture of the concrete roof where we scraped down the old latex and tried to put down a coat, and it's kind of a disappointing.
A lot of challenges to that roof.
Disappointing outcome there. So the team that was working at that site spent 3 days prepping it. I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of physical work. And then when we were going to put the latex down, it rained for the last 2 days. And we tried to do it anyway, and it wasn't successful. So that was discouraging for both the team who had their whole heart into it, as well as for the homeowner who was expecting to have a sealed roof by the time the week was over.
Right. They actually, that two of the crew, our team left the island. They had come down on a different flight and were leaving on a different flight, and on that Saturday, or they went back trying to get it done.
And still
and they still were hit with some rain and water. So
So we worked on another house at the interior. We basically put some wallboard up, reframed, hung some doors, fixed some metal roofing. Here's a gentleman, and his story sticks with me, that during the hurricane, he was just up the hill from the river that we saw earlier that was overflowing. And as the storm came, he was able to rescue his neighbor and bring the neighbor back to his house. He had lost his roof, so they sat outside by a concrete wall with a dish antenna over their head. So during that middle of the storm, the eye of the storm, it calmed down, and the neighbor was able to go to relocate to some family. and he was left there for the next 8 hours as the backside of the storm came through by himself on his second floor deck by a concrete wall with a dish antenna over his head for 8 hours to survive the storm.
We heard a lot of stories of people who aren't living in their house, their own house. They're living with relatives and families and friends because their house is there's too much destruction for them to live in their house. So that was a common story.
Yep.
So a highlight is his grandson came in, who was about 7 years old. We had already left for the day, but it was probably midway through the week, and he said his grandson danced around and said, "Papa, it's new." So just because he had walls and a door.
Any other stories? Any other accomplishments that particularly stuck out?
No.
We were our communications team, our team that was kind of touring the island and looking at other projects. We were invited to attend a celebration for a fishing pier that had been destroyed during the hurricane, and this was on one of the poorest parts of the island. The Presbyterian Church has no churches in this part of the island, so the local church collaborated with another local church, along with the community and a fishermen's co-op, to rebuild this fishing pier, to put in a generator and put in new refrigeration so that the fishermen would have some place to store their fish. And as we were leaving, one of the fishermen said, "Do you want to buy some fish?" Because now the challenge is, how do you get the fish to market? No,
Yeah,
actually.
right.
We were a ways away from any place we could have put it into a refrigerator. But it was just fascinating to see what each individual community was doing, along with what was happening with local houses, and really how communities came together. And we're looking to the future. So how do you rebuild the community? How do you anticipate and get ready for the next hurricane?
Because it's going to happen.
And how do you protect yourselves? And so what do you do to come together as a community and have support for each other? So it was a very fascinating from that perspective.
Yep.
How many churches did you visit?
Probably 8 churches and all of their grassroots projects, and they came and took us on tours, and they talked about what they've been doing. And some of the churches functioned as staging areas so that other churches, other pastors could come in and get supplies for more remote villages. So they had developed their own strategies for how to rebuild and how to get people the resources they needed. So it was a very informative trip. And I don't know about you two, but I came home feeling like a truck had hit me. I was emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausted for 2 days after I got home. It was just such an incredible experience.
So I found interesting, but it does make sense. I mentioned we were staying by the coast, which is more of the resort area, and that was a world different than inland, because it's an income stream. So the resorts were the first, as opposed to the guy in the mountain getting his house repaired. They were repairing the Embassy Suites and the Hilton. So two different worlds, from the coast to inland.
Right. And we were told that anyone could speak at least some English, and that just wasn't true. We went into a Walmart early on Sunday morning because somebody was sick and we needed to get something, and even the Walmart staff didn't speak much English. So that was also eye-opening. Yeah. So any other thoughts any other accomplishments? What was the most meaningful thing for you both in the whole trip? What did you come away with?
The most meaningful thing was that both my daughters were with me. It was just a great experience.
You see them in a different light.
Yeah, and I see their growth, and it's heartwarming.
And they both have talents that they really contributed and were able to give, and it was great to have both of them along with us.
Yeah, right. Sarah traveled with you most of the time, and I was worried about her because she's a hammer girl. So I asked her after that first day, "Hey, how's it going?" "Good." "Okay, good."
She was our videographer.
So then, So then I asked the next day, saying I was expecting, "Dad, do you think I can come on a work crew now?" I really was. And every day I asked her, she was, oh, tomorrow we're going here, and I can't wait to get to the fishing village. I want to. So that was a great aspect of her going down the trip. It was another way that she can help and do things differently.
And she did a great job. Yeah, Frank, what was your most meaningful?
So I guess I'm going to
aspect?
echo Matt to a certain extent. It was working with my eldest son. So he was 14 on his first trip, and now he's 26. And that progression, I remember just seeing him go. The last trip he went on was a couple years ago to West Virginia, but he was just out of college, so he's still kind of a kid. Now he's a man. I see him communicate with Matt and Larry and George, not as a juvenile any longer, but pretty much as I don't want to say peer per se, but certainly as a man. So that's a great thing to see. I think just the one of the last things that my Carmel said to me was, thank you for your solidarity as we were leaving, after hugging and saying goodbye, and we'll probably never see you again.
We have some pictures of the people we work with.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that hit me on so many different levels. That thank you for your solidarity.
Yes. And I heard that as well. I heard people said, the fact that outside groups from the mainland come down here and work with us and give us this support means that you all care about us, and that was so important to them. So I think that was just such an important aspect of it.
Especially
trip.
after the aspect of politically what's happening in the mainland, I guess, versus what's not happening down there.
Yeah, it was. But there were some pretty heartbreaking, heart-wrenching stories, and it was some days it was hard to understand.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. We've made the commitment to return to Puerto Rico, and I've seen over the progression of our skill set and what we do and who we are. We get better every year, particularly when there's some continuity that we're going down. We're going to understand the culture a little bit better. We have contacts now, so I look forward to an even more successful year next year. Which you had asked, when do we start planning? I've already seen an email that we need to get together and start the planning for next year.
So this is a long-term recovery effort, right? Then they
This is
kept saying that
15
to
years.
us. This is a long-term recovery. Katrina was projected to be 10 years.
And there's still
working
need down
on
there.
it. Yeah, and so in Puerto Rico, 15 years was what we heard. So this is not going to be over soon. We're going to be doing this for at least next year. But this is something that's going to be going on, and there's a dire need for folks to be involved.
Yeah. So the organization we work with, they have. I'm trying to think of their job title, but they have the workers that go out and meet with the people that have the need for repair and whatnot. They hadn't had any work crews come to this area, Camarillo, where we were. I think our group was the first one in what
18 months?
Yeah, 18 months or so. So it was kind of a momentous thing for them, for us to finally show up, to do some work for them. So that kind of took us all back a little bit. No one's been to this area in 18 months.
Yeah.
And the sad thing was there was nobody following us the following week, and we're so used to an organization that has back-to-back people, groups coming down. So I'm not sure they had no schedule to get another team out there.
Right.
Yeah, there is an amazing amount of work still to do. And I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to reiterate that, we're not just, a house is a house, and it's important to people, but it's also helping them rebuild their lives and trying to get back on their feet, because we all depend on our house to be able to do that. And again, people are out of work for months. People have lost family members, both by death and tragedy, but also by economic
Exodus.
reasons. People left. So a lot of older people in the island are alone and isolated. So there's all issues around trauma, around Alzheimer's is a big issue, around just who takes care of you when you're alone and isolated in a house in a remote part of the island if you're,
Don't
85,
have family.
and infirm. So there are lots of needs down there. So
I'm going to go back to one of my high points.
Okay.
So kind of a running joke. We pack our lunch, and it's sandwiches and fruit and whatnot. And there's usually one lucky team every year that has a homeowner that feeds them every day. And I was the lucky team this year. So we had the mothers of these workers coming over and cooking us lunch every single day. And then one day they took us out to a restaurant. That was a highlight.
That's great. And again, this is all volunteers, right? Everybody on this team was a volunteer. So
On our teams. So the Lutheran folks were,
yes,
they were paid.
they were staff, right? Yeah, but they were local. But I mean, the people that were going. Did you have any other pictures? I kind of cut you off.
Yeah, no, I think we are. This is just the groups, the work groups. Nope, there you go. And some of the crews that we worked with.
Okay.
And this is a group you worked with.
Yep.
When you were traveling.
Right. So again, it was a great group, great way to meet not only people from here, but also new people,
Yeah.
So what I like about the structure that you've put together, you and Beth, on this series of shows is I look forward to the instructional
yes.
series, or the instructional show, to be able to impart some of our knowledge. It was hard learned. Our first trip, it was like the Wild West. It was shortly after Katrina, where there was no supervision. It was they gave you an address for a house. You had to find the house. You had to get your own material most of the time. So we've learned the hard way, and that's one of the things we do now is we truly try to vet the organization that we're working with to make sure that, again, our skill set is appropriate. They have the tools, they have the material, and it's a safe environment.
So I guess it's a good segue into saying that we have often had other people on the team, or not necessarily members of Bedford Presbyterian Church. We have had other congregations send members, but also we have people, there was a gentleman from North Carolina, a gentleman from Illinois, somehow linked up with us and asked if they could come. So
The Bedford Men's Club sent a couple guys one year.
So over the years, we have encouraged and still encourage folks, if they're interested in listening and they'd like to get involved, to call the church and find out. But we would also encourage people who are part of an organization who would like to do this work. And we don't have to have 28 people show up as volunteers. You could have a small group. In fact, in some ways that might be easier to accommodate down there in facilities, is to have a team of people. We're looking at alternative trips. There's been an interest in sending some medical teams. There's a huge medical need on the island, and a couple of churches who said that that's something they want to do in the future, is to build a clinic that's based, that answers their community's needs and the people who live there. And so we're looking at an opportunity there were 3 doctors on our team and 2 medical students and a nurse. So we're looking for ways to kind of tie in those interests with the needs that we heard about. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. If you don't like to hammer nails, there are other opportunities to get involved, and we would encourage people to get in touch.
I heard discussion about a veterinarian trip.
I heard that too. Yep.
So you have many different
Many
facets.
options, yes. There's a huge need, and it's a great opportunity. And we will have several upcoming programs. And to your point, Frank, one of them will be what are the nuts and bolts of planning a hurricane recovery trip. So we thank everybody for listening, and hope to see you on a future program.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.